Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the docu-series on my journey to solo motherhood. My name is Corey Wiseman and today I'm going to be talking with you about how I chose a sperm donor. I'll also be sharing some information with you that I learned along the way about the sperm donor program and process. In my first episode, I talked about my decision to become a single mother by choice. The more I read and thought, the louder the call to have a child on my own became. So, having decided that this is just what I wanted for my life, the next thing I had to think about was how. Turns out this is a very common concern for people who choose to parent on their own. That is, how to make a baby by yourself. First, I had to decide if I wanted the donor, that's the male person who would lend a little more than a helping hand in the situation, to be someone I knew or didn't know. I thought about having someone I know help out because then my child and I would know more about his or her biological father, and he could possibly be in my child's life here and there. Also, free sperm. I even reached out to a couple of old flames before realizing that this was not the way I wanted to go. A known donor could present legal and emotional complications later on, both for me and my child. If I chose to go with a known donor, such as a single friend, we'd have to clarify expectations and work on coming up with an agreement as to how much involvement he would have in the child's life, ranging from no participation at all to co-parenting. Even if we came to an agreement and wrote up like a statement of intentions, which is not a legally binding contract, in most states, the man would have the exact same rights as any biological father, regardless of whether we were ever married. Even if I had intended to be a single mother by choice at the time of conception, I could not independently decide to keep him out of my child's life if he decided later that he wanted to be involved. Relationships are work and more stress. Fostering a relationship between child and father, as well as a working relationship between me and the father, it's a lot of work and it would be very stressful. A known donor could even try to stop me from moving or traveling outside of the country with my child. The idea of having a man in and out of my child's life and having to worry about custody and visitation rights was a big concern. Also, a potential benefit of having a child on my own would be no in-laws. Of course, whether that's a good or bad thing would depend on the particular in-laws, but I like the idea of my child and I always having holidays with our family and not having to take turns with an in-law family. The thought of my child spending holidays or any significant amount of time with the known donor and his family and his future girlfriends and wife and own children someday, instead of our family, was upsetting to me. This combined with legal and emotional stressors was not a risk I was willing to take just for the benefit of knowing a little bit more about the donor. It's worth mentioning that using sperm from a known donor, if done medically, including testing it for STDs, which takes 6 months, and testing it for sperm count, motility, quality, washing it from the semen, freezing, storing, thawing, and preparing it for insemination would all be quite costly too. So if you choose a known donor and you go through the process of testing his sperm, it would be time-consuming and expensive anyway. And he could get some bad test results and you might end up not using his sperm after all that time and money spent. Or you could choose to go the intercourse route with a known donor without any medical testing, in which case you would then be opening yourself up to the possibility of STDs, and you could risk wasting precious time trying to conceive with someone who's infertile or has a low sperm count, low motility, or poor quality sperm. Donations to sperm banks have all been tested for STDs and HIV, in addition to sperm count, motility, and quality. I should probably address another option of acquiring free help with this problem, the one-night stand. Seems simple enough, and some women do choose to go this route. For me, ethically, it just went against my core values to knowingly bring a child into the world in this way. It's also an incredible health risk to the woman. Sex rarely leads to a viable pregnancy on the first try, so a woman might have to expose herself to unprotected sex via several one-night stands. You know, it can easily take a year or so for sex to result in a viable pregnancy. That's a lot of one-night stands. I didn't want to risk getting an STD or HIV or anything. It's an especially high risk to take when you wouldn't even know if the man you just met was even fertile or has a high sperm count or good motility or quality or anything. And then if you do get pregnant with a one-night stand, do you ever go back and tell him that he's fathered a child? Not if you don't want to potentially open yourself up to a slew of legal complications, which is probably why you chose not to use a friend as a donor in the first place. Personally, I don't think it's ethical to deny a man the opportunity to decide whether or not he wants to be in his child's life. And it's also important for the child's sake that their father be given the option to be in their life. Both the father and the child could be angry or resentful if you never told the one-night stand that he'd fathered a child because of your own desire to be a choice mom. This would probably be really difficult for a child to come to terms with when they're old enough to understand. So mom got knocked up for free, but I still don't know anything, literally not a thing about my biological father. First and last name, maybe. Nothing about their background, family, health history, let alone personality traits, hobbies, etc. When you go with an anonymous sperm donor, you're given this kind of information, with the exception of the donor's name, as well as the peace of mind in knowing that the man knowingly gave of himself to help bring a child into the world. Quick side note, just to address the difference between the terms daddy or dad and father. So daddy or dad is a social role where father is a biological role. A daddy loves, disciplines, plays with, and usually lives with a child. When we refer to a person whose sperm helped to create a child, we use the term father. You could also use the term donor. So my child has a father, the donor, and at the present time, there is no daddy or dad in our family. With regard to crafting the father narrative for the children of anonymous donors, it's important to note that these men have not rejected their offspring, but have instead given the mothers the most awesome gift of their lives. The anonymous donor is not a bad dad who walked out and abandoned his family. Rather, he is a good man who helped the mother and child become a family. Choice moms describe the anonymous donor as having done something positive for them and for their child. Additionally, the anonymous donors cannot disappoint the child in ways that dads or known donors sometimes do. So, an unknown donor it would be. Insemination with an unknown donor may be the simplest method of conception available for single women, as there are virtually no legal complications and you don't have to worry about the biological father ever locating the child and wanting custody or visitation rights. The downsides of this option are cost and not personally knowing very much about the child's biological father. Regarding cost, while it's very expensive up front, it is cheaper than court fees should a known donor ever sue for custody. And to me, it's very much worth the cost to not have a man in and out of my child's life, to not have to share my child with a man and his future girlfriends or wife or family, and to avoid the emotional stress and legal stress that a known donor with free sperm could present. As I like to say, free sperm is not free. Additionally, using an anonymous donor can be beneficial with regard to a future potential daddy figure, as any of my future partners wouldn't have to contend with a baby daddy and could much more easily step into the role of dad should that opportunity ever present itself. Since my child would be conceived by donor insemination, there would be no obstacles to overcome if I ever have a husband who would like to legally adopt my child someday and join our family, because the donor signed over his parental rights at the time he agreed to be a donor. Let it be known that we would not change our last name from Wiseman in this situation. In using anonymous donor sperm, I knew that it would be safe and high quality. I also knew that I would never have to battle with legal or emotional complications. This is a very personal decision, and legally, emotionally, and ethically, this just felt like the right thing for me. How did I choose the donor? Well, this was a process. First, I scheduled an appointment with my OBGYN to tell her my plan. She suggested a local sperm bank called Cryobiology, located just 2.5 miles from my home in Columbus, Ohio. Next, I procrastinated. I was so worried that the donors' profiles would look like the gross guys I had seen on dating apps, whom I affectionately refer to as neck tattoos. When I finally sat down to start looking, I was pleasantly surprised that they all seemed so normal, like they could be the guy who lives down the street or my friend's cousin or something. I was also surprised that there were so few profiles to choose from, only about 100 or so. I was expecting to have to dig through thousands of profiles. Cryobiology boasts that they only accept less than 1% of potential donors. They do the weeding out of neck tattoos, so their clients don't have to. They reject any sperm with STDs, low sperm count, low motility, overall poor quality, as well as reject any donors with poor fertility history, poor personal health history, or poor family health history. Upon starting my search, I learned that most donors provided photos of themselves as babies or young children. I guess the theory behind that is so that the clients can imagine and visualize like how cute their babies would be. Anyway, only some donors had photos of themselves as adults. It was important to me to be able to see what the donor looked like as an adult, so I immediately ruled out any donor without an adult photo. The donor I chose did provide an adult photo in addition to photos of himself as a young child. I don't think I should share his adult photo on the internet, but I think he's attractive. His picture was taken in 2006, so it's a little outdated, but I think he's someone I would actually swipe right on a dating app. Huh. Second, it was important to me that my child look as much like me as possible, given that this is already an unconventional way of bringing a child into the world. I wouldn't want to increase my child's likelihood of having some kind of identity confusion by not looking very much like the only parent they know. So I narrowed my search to donors who were Caucasian, and I preferred brown hair and brown eyes, but that wasn't a deal breaker. The donor I ultimately chose is Caucasian with brown hair and brown eyes. The staff at cryobiology described him as having the biggest brown eyes ever. He is a quiet, observant, down-to-earth soul who wishes the best for everyone. In describing his appearance, the staff wrote, slim body type, medium to dark brown hair that has a slight auburn cast in the summer months, chocolate brown eyes that dance, perfectly shaped eyebrows, noticeably long eyelashes, average sized nose with very straight bridge, full lips, wide smile. Sounds dreamy. Next, I noticed on each donor's profile there was a descriptor CMV status, and about half of them were positive, and of course half of them were negative, and I didn't know what that meant, so I had to do some research. CMV stands for cytomegalovirus, which is a common virus that affects about half of the population. Once infected, your body retains the virus for life. Most people don't know they have CMV because it rarely causes problems in healthy people. However, contracting CMV if you're pregnant is cause for concern because the virus can pass to the baby, who might then experience symptoms such as premature birth, low birth weight, jaundice, developmental delays, hearing loss, vision problems, poorly functioning liver, skin rashes, abnormally small head, pneumonia, or seizures. Kind of a big deal. So if I myself were CMV positive, then it wouldn't matter if the donor I chose happened to be CMV positive or negative. But if I were CMV negative, then I should choose a CMV negative donor so as not to risk contracting the virus from the sperm and affecting my child. Like most people, I didn't know whether I was CMV positive or negative, so I had a blood test done at my doctor's office and learned that I was negative. So this ruled out all of the positive donors, about half of my options. I did choose a donor whose CMV status was negative. Selecting a yes or an open donor was an important criterion for my search as well. When a man agrees to be a sperm donor, he must decide whether he would be open to hearing from any offspring produced from his donation when they reach the age of 18. If this is something they would be open to, at least at the time of donating, then they check the yes box. If they know that they absolutely would never want to have any contact with any future offspring produced by their donation, they check the no box. Since I would want to give my child the option of trying to contact their biological father when they're age 18 or older, I once again narrowed my search to include only yes donors. Turns out cryobiology charges an extra $100 per vial for yes donors. So in the end, this is a choice that cost me an extra $800, but I think it was worth it. Having said that, a donor is allowed to change his mind. So, for example, a man who might be in his early 20s and single at the time of donating might think it's a cool notion to imagine a future child of his calling him up and wanting to meet him someday. So he checks the yes box. And then 18 plus years pass, during which time the donor has since married and started a family of his own. And then the phone rings all those years later. He might decide that having never told his wife that he donated sperm in his early 20s, he may not want to disrupt his current family situation by introducing a child he didn't know he had into his life. Can you imagine telling your child for the first 18 years of their life that when they turn 18, they can contact their father only to have him change his mind? Not to mention having completely wasted all the extra money for that option. Anyway, this leads me to the next factor in my decision-making process. I thought it would be worthwhile to try to estimate the age and or marital status of the man at the time of donation to help ensure that he wouldn't change his mind about being an open donor. As I mentioned previously, it could be devastating for a child to spend the first 18 years of their life believing they could meet their father only to have him change his mind. So, to try to minimize that risk, I attempted to estimate the age of the men at the time of their donation based on some clues like in their baby photos. So, some of their baby photos were obviously taken in the 1980s and others in the 1990s. I gave preference to those whose baby photos looked like they were taken in the 80s in the hopes that they might be older and more mature at the time of donation and less likely to have a change of heart after 18 plus years. It was even better if I could determine whether or not the donor was already married, in which case his wife probably put him up to it, or had children of his own. The baby photos of the donor I chose looked like they were taken in the 80s, and he referenced his wife and children during his audio interview. So his wife clearly knows that he was a sperm donor. Like I said, she may have even put him up to it. It is a very time-consuming and somewhat intense program to go through with rules about how often and when a man can ejaculate outside of making donations, so it seems nearly impossible that this is something that a man could commit to without his wife knowing. Therefore, a phone call from my child many years later shouldn't come as a surprise to him or his wife, so I think he'd be more likely to not change his mind than some of the donors who were younger and single at the time of donating. In keeping with my concern for my child to meet their biological father someday, I preferred that the donor be close geographically. So there are sperm banks all around the world, and while some American women choose donors from other continents, I wanted to keep mine as close to home as possible. Cryobiology sells sperm donated from men in Columbus, Pittsburgh, and Wilmington, North Carolina. In choosing a donor from Columbus, I'm hoping that it'll be more likely for my child to be able to meet him in person someday. Of course, donors can move, and so could we, but I thought it wouldn't hurt our chances to choose a donor who lives in the same city. So I chose a donor who is from Columbus. Somehow I've made it to my 7th search criteria before listing what is probably the most important factor to consider, the donor's medical history. I read through each donor's personal health histories and family health histories, which are all very detailed. From reading my donor's personal health history, I learned that he is 5'9" and weighs 160 pounds. He has an easygoing personality and is a hard worker. His mother's ancestry is German and his father's ancestry is Scottish. He is one of 4 boys, and I'm one of 4 girls. At the time of donating, he was in college pursuing a degree in psychiatry. He and his wife had a 3-month-old daughter born in 2005. He might have had a second child by the end of his time donating because he mentioned his children, plural, in one of his essays and referred to his kids during his audio interview. Anyway, he wears corrective lenses for nearsightedness, just like me. He had braces, I did too, and he had surgery for a hernia as well as an appendectomy. He eats a good diet, exercises regularly, mostly by swimming. With regard to the donor's family health history, his parents, grandparents, and 3 brothers all have brown hair, brown eyes, and medium complexion. Other than his father being over 5'11" and his mother and paternal grandmother being under 5'5", the rest of his family members are all between 5'6" and 5'10". He has no family history of multiple births. His parents were 51 and 54 at the time that he donated. One grandfather was still living at age 75, and the other 3 grandparents had passed away at ages 55 from breast cancer in 1980. Age 70 from leukemia in 1988, and age 69 due to complications with rheumatoid arthritis in 1988. It's worth noting that medical advances have come a long way with treating these diseases since the 1980s. No one in his family had any birth defects, and there are no known genetic conditions that run in his family. And considering his parents, grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, and cousins, his family health history is clear of heart, respiratory, gastrointestinal, metabolic, endocrine, urinary, genital, reproductive system, neurological, mental health, skin, and alcohol addiction problems. Other than the aforementioned breast cancer, leukemia, and rheumatoid arthritis, the only other medical condition noted was that his father was born with color blindness. As you can see, the medical history is very thorough for each of the donors. Finally, I considered the short answer essay questions. There were seriously a few donors who wrote that the reason they were donating was for the money. I could not in good conscience show that to my child someday. The donor I chose seemed to genuinely want to help other people who couldn't conceive on their own and seemed to have a genuine love for children and viewed them as blessings in his life that brought him joy. I also liked how he and the cryobiology staff described his personality and that his interests include martial arts, woodworking, music, and entertaining children, especially considering that I'm a kindergarten teacher. I would like to introduce my child to Taekwondo, woodworking, and music lessons as an homage to their biological father. To recap, these are the factors I considered in choosing the donor: must have an adult photo, must be Caucasian, preferably with brown hair and brown eyes, must be CMV negative, must be a yes donor. Preferably older and or married at the time of donation, preferably lives in Columbus, has good personal health history and family health history, and has good responses to the written questions. Of course, I made spreadsheets. Here are some fun facts about my donor. He lived in New Zealand from June to August of 2000. He participated in a foreign exchange program to work on a community service project there. His favorite subject in school was science. He's always been interested in how things work, how minds work, and why things happen the way they do. He plays the tuba and trombone. A memorable event from his childhood was when he was 11 years old and he and his mom started taking Taekwondo classes together. Sharing this experience made them very close. Do you want to hear a little snippet from my donor's audio interview? All right, listen up.
Describe a memorable event in your childhood.
A memorable event in my childhood would have to be back when I was 11 and me and my mom started actually doing Taekwondo together. She took me to her class, and I've always been interested in Taekwondo, and now me and my mom would actually be able to practice together.
How much does sperm from an anonymous donor cost? Well, a 3-month subscription to cryobiology, which allows access to view the donor's profiles, costs about $100. The price of sperm vials varies. It's a business, so the cost increases for added benefits, like if the donor provides a photo, an audio interview, etc. Being a yes donor also increases the price by $100 per vial. The vials I purchased were $745 each, and it usually takes multiple vials for multiple attempts to conceive. There are also additional costs for shipping or transporting if needed. Total cost will vary substantially for each person, but for my subscription fee, transportation fees, and vials, I spent $6,134 on sperm. Unfortunately, insurance companies do not yet cover this, so this was an out-of-pocket expense. To be clear, this was just the cost of the sperm. It's a fraction of the total cost of conception, which I will discuss more in a future episode. Here are some notes about the sperm donation program and process that I learned along the way that I thought were interesting. First of all, a man has to be under the age of 40 at the time of donating. The maximum number of offspring allowed per metropolis, such as Central Ohio, is 10. Now, this could be more if women purchase his sperm from other cities, states, countries, or continents. As of February 2020, my donor had 5 reported pregnancies and 4 reported births from his donations. I don't know if the 5th pregnancy resulted in miscarriage or if that client was still pregnant in February 2020 at the time they reported it and just hadn't given birth yet. I also know that my donor had children of his own with his wife, so any future children of mine already have several half-siblings out there. Clients are asked to self-report births from donor sperm, and there's no accountability for clients who fail to do so. So it's possible that there are more offspring who are unaccounted for. I also don't know if, of the 4 reported births by my donor sperm, if they were by 1, 2, 3, or 4 different women. Nor do I know if any of them were single women like me, lesbians, or married heterosexuals whose partner's sperm just didn't work. I also don't know when the births occurred, so I don't know how old the children are. Donors are asked to contact the clinic when changes occur in their personal or family health histories. There's no accountability if donors fail to do this. The clinic does not regularly reach out to donors for medical or health updates. In addition to testing for STDs, CMV, sperm count, and motility, donor sperm undergoes genetic testing, including chromosomal testing, testing for spinal muscular atrophy, cystic fibrosis testing, and more. If a baby conceived with donor sperm is born with a genetic condition, any remaining vials of that donor's sperm are then discarded from the clinic. In addition to completing the paperwork with their background information, health histories, and written responses to questions, donors are interviewed by the cryobiology staff, a genetic counselor, and a doctor. The interviewers check for any inconsistencies. All donors are paid for their initial donations, even if their sample won't be used. If men were only to be paid if their samples were used, they might be inclined to be dishonest in their paperwork. If a donor asks, "Will this response rule me out as a donor?" The staff replies, "No, it's a whole picture thing," to encourage truthful responses. During the donation program, men provide 5 to 8 samples per month for 9 to 24 months. They are compensated at least $75 for each donation and up to $100 per donation if they provide extras like adult photos and audio interviews, things like that. I don't know if they get paid more for being yes donors, but I do know that the clinic increases the price of these vials by $100. So men could earn anywhere from around $4,000 to $20,000 for participating in the donation program. Each donor is limited to supplying 400 vials. Most don't reach that. Each donation is divided into about 2 vials to maximize profits. My donor had approximately 100 vials remaining as of November 2019. If there are any men watching this who are under the age of 40 with relatively good personal and family health histories and are interested in becoming a donor, or if you're watching this and know someone who might be, please visit cryobio.com. Thank you for watching and thank you for your interest in my story.